The wind drifted off the wide James River as if carrying secrets from the heart of a land still untamed, a place where towering pines leaned over untouched soil and wild deer stepped lightly through the brush. The year was 1607, and the English settlement of Jamestown was little more than a fragile collection of wooden structures and desperate hopes. Hunger gnawed at the settlers like an invisible beast, and fear lurked behind every shadow. Yet somewhere beyond the tree line, in a world of ceremonial fires, intricate beadwork, and rhythms of the forest, lived the Powhatan people who had roamed these lands for centuries before the English had ever dreamed of crossing the ocean. Among them was a young girl whose laughter flowed like a river, whose quick feet danced through the village pathways, and whose curiosity surpassed the borders drawn by adults. Her name was Pocahontas. Captain John Smith had come seeking opportunity, not knowing that his path would cross with someone who would alter the course of his understanding of humanity. When he first stepped onto the soil of the New World, he expected danger, labor, and uncertainty, but he did not imagine the depth of connection he would feel with someone so unlike anyone he had ever known. Still, the path to that connection began with conflict rather than harmony. During a cold afternoon in December, when the trees stood bare and the sky seemed low with winter's breath, John Smith was captured by a Powhatan hunting party deep in the forest. Their eyes held suspicion, their weapons poised for threat, and Smith was dragged through miles of tangled woods until he reached the village of Werowocomoco, the capital of the Powhatan chiefdom. Ceremonial fires burned bright as Smith was pushed into a large lodge filled with warriors and elders. The imposing figure of Chief Powhatan sat at the center, adorned with shells, copper ornaments, and a mantle of feathers that signified his authority over more than 30 tribes. The unfamiliar chants, the rhythmic tapping of sticks, and the intense gazes of the tribe made Smith's heart pound. He had been in battles before, faced armies, storms, and rebellions, but this moment carried a different kind of peril, one rooted not in weaponry but in cultural misunderstanding. He could not decipher whether he was part of a ritual, a trial, or a death sentence. Yet among all the intimidating figures in the lodge, one small face stood out. A young girl wearing a beaded deerskin dress and a necklace of river pearls watched him with bright, searching eyes. She was neither afraid nor hostile. She was curious. What followed happened so quickly that Smith struggled to understand it even years later. The warriors brought 2 heavy stones, placed them on the ground, and motioned for him to kneel. They pushed him forward until his head lay on the stones. A warrior raised a wooden club above him. Smith braced himself for death, his breath tight in his chest, while the world around him exploded in cries and movement. But before the club fell, the girl darted forward. Pocahontas threw herself across Smith's body, her arms stretched toward the warriors, her small voice pleading with her father for mercy. The room froze. The power of a chief meant little in the face of a daughter's desperate plea. Chief Powhatan hesitated, his stern expression softening as he looked at the young girl shielding the foreigner. After a silent exchange that carried the weight of both love and authority, he lowered his hand. The warriors stepped back. Smith's life was spared. For John Smith, that moment became a symbol of unexpected humanity. For Pocahontas, it was the first step toward an extraordinary connection she herself could not yet understand. Over the following weeks, Smith was treated not as a prisoner but almost as an adopted visitor. He was taught customs, given food, and shown the ways of the Powhatan people. Pocahontas would watch him from a distance at first, amused by his attempts to mimic the dances, his confusion during rituals, and his fascination with the intricate beadwork of the women. Eventually, her curiosity brought her closer. She would shyly offer him roasted corn, show him how to crack open a hickory nut, or giggle when he stumbled over a Powhatan word. Smith, who was used to the etiquette of English courts and military ranks, found her presence refreshing, pure, lively, and unburdened by politics. When Smith finally returned to Jamestown, the colony was on the verge of collapse. The settlers were sick, starving, and disorganized. Some had died of disease, others of cold, and many more teetered on the edge of despair. But Pocahontas's visits soon changed everything. She would arrive with a small group of Powhatan women carrying baskets filled with corn, beans, squash, and sometimes dried fish. Her arrival brought not only supplies but a sense of peace, as if her presence softened the hostility between the English and the Powhatan. She and Smith would talk in fragments, half English, half Powhatan, half gestures, but somehow the meaning always reached through. He told her about England, about huge stone buildings, about horses pulling carriages, about oceans so vast that months were needed to cross them. She told him about her people, about the spirits of the forest, about the dances held during the harvest, and about the stories her elders told around the fire. There were moments that seemed almost unreal to Smith. Once, he watched Pocahontas perform a playful dance for several children near the village outskirts. Her movements flowed like a breeze bending wildflowers, and her laughter carried across the meadow with a sincerity he had rarely heard in his own world. Another time, she stopped him from venturing into a marsh where hidden sinkholes could swallow a man whole. She pointed, shook her head firmly, and tugged him back with urgency, saving him without a spoken word. Their bond deepened not through dramatic declarations but through small gestures, shared glances, and unspoken understanding. Yet the world around them refused to remain peaceful. Tensions rose between the colonists and the Powhatan tribes as more English settlers arrived, clearing land and demanding food during harsh winters. Misunderstandings turned into threats, threats into confrontations, and confrontations into skirmishes. Pocahontas often stood between the two worlds, trying to mend the growing rift with her youthful courage. Smith once recalled a night when she ran through the darkness to warn him of an ambush planned by a hostile faction of her tribe. Breathless and frightened, she insisted he escape before dawn. Smith believed without question, and the warning saved many settlers' lives. That night became etched into his memory, not just because she saved him again, but because he realized that she risked her own safety for people who were not her own. Their connection was never formalized, never declared as lovers in any official record, yet it grew in the quiet spaces that history often overlooks. Sometimes, while Smith worked near the river, Pocahontas would sit nearby, weaving a small mat and humming songs from her tribe. He would carve wooden trinkets and give them to her. Nothing valuable, just simple shapes of animals or leaves. She accepted each one as if it were treasure. Once, she handed him a small shell comb polished to a reddish shine. He kept it tucked into the lining of his jacket for years, even after he left the New World. But the fragile bridge between them and between their worlds could not withstand the storm that was coming. Smith was injured in a gunpowder explosion, an accident that nearly killed him. Weak and unable to continue his duties, he was forced to return to England for treatment. The departure was sudden. He had no chance to explain, no way to say goodbye. When Pocahontas came to Jamestown and learned he was gone, she was told he had died. The news struck her deeply. She withdrew from the settlers, her once frequent visits stopping entirely. The world that had felt open and hopeful now seemed heavy with loss and confusion. Years passed. Pocahontas was eventually captured by the English during rising conflicts and held as leverage. In captivity, she was taught English customs, Christian practices, and was baptized under the name Rebecca. During this time, she met John Rolfe, an English tobacco farmer who treated her with surprising gentleness. Rolfe admired her resilience and compassion, and she eventually married him, a union that brought temporary peace between the English and the Powhatan. She later traveled to England with Rolfe and their young son, where she was presented as a symbol of harmony between two civilizations. It was in England, far from the forests of her childhood, that she unexpectedly met John Smith again. The moment was filled with shock, disbelief, and a flood of emotions unspoken. She had believed him dead. He had never known she mourned him. Their conversation was polite, almost formal, but the depth beneath their words trembled like a distant echo of what once had been. She addressed him with dignity, but her eyes carried questions that time would never allow her to voice. Not long afterward, Pocahontas fell ill from an unfamiliar English disease. She passed away at around 21 years old, leaving behind a legacy wrapped in beauty and tragedy. Smith, upon hearing the news, felt the weight of her memory press into him like an old wound opening again. He wrote of her kindness, her bravery, and the many times she had saved the precarious colony from destruction. To him, she was the embodiment of courage in a world where hostility ruled. Their story never blossomed into a conventional romance, yet their bond transcended the simple definitions of friendship, loyalty, or affection. It became a legend because it lived at the intersection of two worlds, where understanding flickered through fear, where a young girl changed the fate of strangers, and where a man from across the sea found unexpected grace in the heart of a land he barely understood. Their connection was fleeting, delicate, and overshadowed by the forces of history, but it carried the emotional truth that even in the wildest, most uncertain landscapes, humanity can bridge the deepest divides. Their lives moved on separate paths, shaped by duty, circumstance, and the relentless march of time, yet the memory of their brief crossing remained an emblem of what might have been possible between two cultures. It was not a tale of eternal lovers or a happily ever after. It was the story of two people who found each other in a moment when kindness mattered more than survival, when courage shone brighter than fear, and when a single act of compassion altered the course of an entire colony. It was a story of two souls, one young and wild, one weathered and searching, who glimpsed something extraordinary in one another before the world pulled them apart. And though centuries have passed, their story still lingers in the American imagination, not as a perfect legend, but as a reminder that even in the harshest beginnings of a nation, there existed a moment of tenderness powerful enough to echo through time.